He didn't even wait until midnight. Cordelia Moretti, married exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, sat alone in the presidential bridal suite at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, still wearing a dress that costs more than most people's cars, listening to the silence of a room meant for two. Her champagne had gone flat. The roses were still perfect. The bed hadn't been touched, and the man who had kissed her in front of 400 guests and promised her forever was somewhere in this same city in someone else's arms. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just sat there by the window, watching the Boston skyline like it owed her an explanation, and she asked herself the question that would change everything. What kind of woman do I want to be when I walk out of this room? If you have ever loved someone completely, trusted them with the version of yourself nobody else gets to see, and then discovered that trust was just a tool they used against you, then you already know what Cordelia felt in that moment. You already know exactly what she decided. Now, to understand what Cordelia did, you have to understand everything she survived to get there. Cordelia Ashford had never been the kind of woman who needed saving. That was the first thing people got wrong about her. They saw the quiet voice, the careful way she chose her words, the habit she had of listening more than she spoke, and they mistook all of that for weakness. Her own mother had done it. Half the women in her social circle had done it. Eventually, Dante Moretti had done it too. That mistake would cost him everything. But on the morning of her wedding, none of that was visible yet. Cordelia was 31 years old, standing before a full-length mirror inside a suite at the Fairmont, and she was genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. Not the kind of happy that needs convincing. The real kind. The embarrassing kind that makes you smile at nothing while your maid of honor is trying to pin your veil straight. "Hold still," said Marisol, who had been Cordelia's best friend since they were 19 and accidentally enrolled in the same art history lecture. Marisol had opinions about everything and kept most of them to herself until exactly the moment they became necessary. "If I stab you with this pin, it's your fault. You've been saying that for 20 minutes because you keep moving." Marisol stepped back and looked at her with the particular expression she reserved for things she found beautiful and would never admit out loud. "Okay, fine. You look disgustingly good." The dress was ivory silk, clean lines, nothing overdone. Dante had offered to buy her anything. Anything, he'd said, like the word had no ceiling. And she had chosen something simple, that should have told her something about the distance between who she actually was and the world she was walking into. But she had not been thinking about that. She had been thinking about Dante's face the first time he saw her across a museum gala 3 years ago, and the way he crossed the entire room as if the other 200 people in it simply did not register. She had been thinking about Sunday mornings when he made coffee badly and did not apologize for it. About an argument over nothing last February that ended with both of them laughing so hard she had to sit down on the kitchen floor. She had been thinking she was lucky. "You nervous?" Marisol asked. "No," Cordelia said, then admitted, "Honestly, a little. That's normal. You forgot nothing. You have the rings. I have the backup rings. The florist has been confirmed twice. Your father has been in the lobby for 40 minutes, which means he's on his 3rd scotch and will cry exactly once during the ceremony and blame allergies." Cordelia laughed. "That's accurate." Marisol handed her the bouquet. White peonies and something small and green Cordelia had specifically asked for and whose name she could never remember. Then she looked at her seriously. "He loves you, you know. Dante. I've seen the way he looks at you." Cordelia nodded. She believed it then. She genuinely did. Dante Moretti was not a man who made entrances. He did not need to. He was the kind of person whose presence rearranged a room before he said a single word. It was something about the way he stood, the absolute stillness of him, the fact that he never appeared to be looking for anything because he had already assessed everything and found it satisfactory or insufficient. He was 53. Silver at the temples, with dark eyes that gave away nothing unless he wanted them to, and a jaw that looked constructed specifically to hold difficult expressions with authority. He wore the wedding suit like he had been born in it, because Dante Moretti wore everything as if it had been designed for him personally and not the other way around. His best man, a thick-necked man named Frank Calabrese, had been with Dante for 18 years and once described himself as a business facilitator. As the music began, Frank nudged him. "You ready?" Dante straightened one cuff and then the other. A habit. "I've been ready." "You look ready," Frank said, which was the closest he ever came to complimenting anyone. What neither man said, what sat in the space between them like a third person, was the phone call that had come 3 hours earlier. A call from Elena Vasquez, 38, employed in the art department of a private auction house in New York, and Dante Moretti's secret for almost 4 years. Elena had called to say she understood that she would wait. She knew what this marriage was: a shield, a strategic repositioning, a way to make a criminal empire resemble a respectable family concern during a period of federal attention. Dante told her she was patient and that he appreciated it. Then he hung up, straightened his cuffs, and walked down the aisle toward Cordelia with his eyes fixed on her face as though she were the only thing in the room. That was what made Dante genuinely dangerous, in ways that had nothing to do with the men who worked for him, the reach of his influence, or the judges who returned his calls. He was capable of compartmentalizing so completely that he could look at Cordelia in that moment and feel something real. Not guilt, not performance, but something that functioned like love. Dante had trained himself over 20 years to access whichever feeling was useful in whichever moment he occupied. He held Cordelia's hands at the altar and meant every word. That was the cruelest part. The reception at the Mandarin Oriental was the kind of event people described in whispers afterward. The food, the flowers, the string quartet that became a jazz trio at exactly 10. 400 guests, almost none of whom Cordelia knew well, filled the room with noise, champagne, and the particular performance of celebration the very rich have perfected. Cordelia danced with her father, who cried exactly once and blamed allergies. She danced with Dante, and he held her as if she mattered. She put her face against his shoulder, breathed in the clean scent of his jacket, and thought, "This is real. This is mine." She had always known, in the version of knowing that lives in the stomach rather than the mind, that Dante's business was not the kind discussed over dinner. There were phone calls he took in other rooms, men who appeared and disappeared, envelopes that moved between hands at events she was not invited to. She told herself she loved the man, not the machinery. She told herself that whatever he was in that world, he was something different with her. At 11:15, Dante kissed her forehead. "Sal's in trouble. I've got to handle something." Salvatore Domo was one of his captains, a broad-shouldered man with a scar through his left eyebrow and a tendency to create problems at inconvenient times. "Tonight?" Cordelia asked. "It won't take long. Go upstairs. I'll be there in an hour." She searched his face, not suspicious yet, only deciding whether to push. He kissed her again, warm and certain, and she chose not to. "1 hour," she said. "1 hour," he promised. He was lying, and he knew it. Some part of him, not enough, but some, felt the weight of that lie as he walked away through a crowd applauding his wedding while he was already leaving it. Cordelia waited. 1 hour became 2. 2 became 3. She changed out of the wedding dress carefully, hanging it on the back of the closet door because she did not know what else to do with it. She ordered room service and did not eat. She turned on the television and turned it off again. She sat by the window in her robe, watched the city, and told herself there were 100 reasonable explanations. By 2 in the morning, she had stopped telling herself anything. She was reaching for her phone when she noticed Dante's tablet on the nightstand. He had left it before the ceremony, a small carelessness unlike him, the kind that happens when a person is managing too many things at once and does not think his wife is a threat. She did not mean to look at it. That was the truth, though she would later understand that the distance between meaning and doing was smaller than people liked to believe. She picked it up to plug it in. The screen lit. A message thread was already open, and the name at the top was E. Just one letter. No surname. No explanation. The latest message had been sent at 11:45, 45 minutes after Dante kissed her forehead and said Sal was in trouble. "Just got here. The suite's perfect. I missed you." Cordelia read it once. Then she read Dante's response, sent at 11:30. "Leaving in 15. Tell them we'll want the late breakfast." Above that was a message from E, sent at 10 while Cordelia and Dante were dancing. "I keep thinking about what you said. That this changes nothing between us. Do you mean that? Dante's answer had been sent from the bathroom at his own wedding reception. I mean it. This is business. You're not business. Cordelia set the tablet down very carefully. She sat with her hands in her lap and did not move for a long time. There is a thing that happens in moments of real shock. Not movie shock, not the kind with tears and thrown objects, but the real kind, where everything becomes extraordinarily quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way a room becomes quiet when all sound has been replaced by something that has no name. She sat in that quiet. Then she picked up the tablet again because Cordelia Ashford, Cordelia Moretti now, legally, as of 6 hours ago, had a mind that worked like a precise instrument, and that instrument had just been given a problem to solve. Solving problems was one of the things she did better than almost anyone. She scrolled methodically backward. What she found was not merely the thing that breaks you. It was worse than heartbreak because it was organized, deliberate, and free of ambiguity. She found 4 years of a parallel life. She found Elena's full name in older messages written before Dante became cautious enough to reduce her to a single letter. She found inside jokes, hotel reservations, Sunday afternoons, and a looseness in Dante's language he never quite used with Cordelia because Elena did not need to be managed. Elena was the woman he did not perform for. Then Cordelia found a message from 14 months earlier. Elena had asked, "If you could leave the business side behind, would you? Or is it always going to be one thing after another?" Dante had answered, "The marriage is strategy. Ashford's family has connections I need right now, and a public wedding cleans up the narrative. 2 years, maybe 3. Then we figure out something different. You know you're not optional." Cordelia read it 3 times. The marriage is strategy. She turned off the tablet and walked to the window. Boston remained outside, indifferent and beautiful in the way cities are beautiful at 3 in the morning when you are the only person awake enough to see them. She thought about crying. The impulse was real. She had loved this man genuinely and completely. That was not nothing. That was not a small thing to discover had been used. But beneath the grief, deeper and quieter, something else was already moving. Cordelia pressed one hand against the cold glass. 2 years, maybe 3. She was thinking about access, about the joint accounts Dante had created because it made the marriage look real, and because a wife with no access to her husband's finances would raise questions. She was thinking about the files he referenced, the organizational structures he had walked her through in moments of careless confidence, the names, numbers, and offshore arrangements that existed in a world he assumed she would never understand or interfere with. He had made her a Moretti. He had no idea what he had handed her when he did it. She would not cry tonight. There would be time later, somewhere else, somewhere safe. Right now she had something more useful to do with the electricity moving through her. A cold, clarifying current that was partly grief, partly fury, and partly something she would only later identify accurately. It was the feeling of a woman who had just realized she was not, in fact, the person in this situation without power. She called Marisol. It rang twice. "Cor? It's 3 in the morning." "I know." Cordelia's voice was steady. She was surprised by that. "I need you to do something for me." Marisol, who had known Cordelia for 12 years and had never once received a call from her at 3 in the morning, asked carefully, "What happened?" "I'll explain everything. First, I need to know whether your cousin, the one who does financial forensics, is still at that firm in Hartford." Silence. Then, "Cordelia, what happened?" "He didn't come upstairs," she said, simple and factual. "And I found out why." Cordelia heard Marisol sit up. "Oh, honey. I'm not calling to cry, Mari." Her voice did not crack. That surprised her again. "I'm calling because I have 7 days before he expects me to have decided that everything is fine. I need help understanding financial structures considerably more complicated than anything I've dealt with before." When Marisol spoke again, her voice had changed into something quieter and more focused. "My cousin's name is Patricia Reyes. I'll have her number for you by 8. "Thank you." "Are you okay?" Cordelia looked at the wedding dress on the closet door. The silk caught the light from the city and appeared almost ghostly. A beautiful, expensive, unnecessary thing. I'm going to be, she said. An hour earlier, going to be okay had meant surviving betrayal. Now it meant something considerably more precise. She hung up, sat at the desk, opened her laptop, and began to make a plan. Outside, the city breathed its 3 a.m. breath, indifferent and beautiful. She had 7 days. She intended to use every one of them. The alarm on Cordelia's phone sounded at 6:30. For exactly 3 seconds after she opened her eyes, she forgot. 3 seconds of ordinary morning. Pale light through curtains, the distant sound of the city, the feeling of a bed too large and too quiet. Then everything returned, not gradually, but all at once, the way a wave does not announce itself until it has already knocked you sideways. She lay there and let it land. Then she got up. That was the thing Dante had never understood. Cordelia did not process and then act. She acted first, and processed in the space between actions, like someone who had learned that standing still in the middle of a current was the fastest way to drown. At 8:04, Marisol sent Patricia's number and one sentence beneath it. She knows to expect your call. I told her it was urgent. I didn't tell her anything else because it isn't my story to tell. Patricia Reyes had the voice of someone who had delivered difficult information so many times that difficulty had become a texture she moved through without registering. She was businesslike without being cold, specific without being patronizing. Within 4 minutes, she had asked Cordelia 3 questions that made it clear she understood the situation. When you say joint accounts, do you have documentation of the account numbers and associated entities, or only login credentials? Credentials for 6 accounts. Physical documents for 2. I have access to a tablet with message history referencing at least 3 offshore structures by name. One in the Caymans, one routed through a shell in Luxembourg, and one he called the Caruso Fund. Patricia paused, not surprised, but more careful. How much time do you have before your access changes? A week? Maybe less. And your goal? Asset protection? Documentation for legal purposes? Cordelia watched a cab move through the street 20 floors below. I want to understand what I'm standing in the middle of, and then I want to not be standing in it anymore. Patricia was silent for 3 seconds. That's the most honest answer I've ever received to that question. Okay, here's what we're going to do. They spoke for 51 minutes. By the end, Cordelia had a list of 12 tasks to complete before noon, and a clearer picture of the financial architecture Dante had built over 20 years than she had ever expected to acquire. Patricia explained it the way a doctor explains a scan, without flinching or softening, naming each structure for what it was rather than what it had been designed to resemble. The marriage was unusually generous with access rights, Patricia said. That is either real trust or proof that whoever set it up never expected the trust to be tested. It was real trust, Cordelia said. He just trusted the wrong version of me. Patricia did not answer, which was the right choice. Dante returned to the hotel at 9:47. Cordelia knew the time because she looked at her phone when she heard the keycard. She had 40 seconds to put the laptop to sleep and pick up the novel she had pretended to read for 3 days. He entered looking like a man who had showered somewhere else. Damp hair, fresh shirt, the suit jacket from the night before folded over his arm. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He kissed the top of her head. She let him and kept her eyes on the page. Sal's situation took longer than I thought. It usually does. Her tone was neutral. She had practiced neutral for 4 hours. He sat on the edge of the bed and assessed the room, reading it for tension, checking for things out of place. His eyes moved to the desk, the sleeping laptop, the coffee cup. "You sleep?" "Some." She turned a page she had not read. "You hungry?" "I was going to order breakfast." He relaxed. She saw the slight drop in his shoulders, the recalibration away from concern and toward routine. She had given him the correct answer, the answer of a woman who had spent a restless night alone and decided to be a good sport about it. "Order me whatever you're having," he said. She called for eggs, toast, and coffee. When she replaced the phone, he was already looking at his own, already back inside the machinery of his real life. "You trusted the wrong version of me," she thought. "That was your first mistake. I will make sure it is also your last." The next 6 days had a structure nobody except Cordelia would have recognized. On the surface, they were a honeymoon week that had lost momentum. Dante worked half the day. Cordelia toured the city alone or with Marisol, who drove up from Providence on the second day without being asked, which was the kind of thing Marisol did. Dante and Cordelia ate dinner together each evening, and the dinners were not bad. Dante was charming at dinner. He asked questions and remembered the answers. In the specific context of a restaurant table with good wine, he knew how to make a woman feel seen. Cordelia ate, said the right things, and returned each night to open her laptop. The work was meticulous. Patricia made clear that what they were doing was not theft. The joint accounts had been established through Dante's lawyers, with both names equally authorized. Every transfer Cordelia made would be legal. Whether that equality had been an oversight or merely the consequence of arrogance did not matter. Dante assumed nothing could be used against him simply because it belonged to him. By the third morning, Cordelia had moved $4.2 million from 2 joint accounts into a protected trust under her maiden name. Patricia routed the funds through a sequence of legitimate investment transfers, the kind wealthy people make without explanation because wealthy people do not expect to be asked for one. The money was not revenge. It was enough for Cordelia to leave, retain lawyers, and build a life beyond the reach of whatever Dante decided to become when he understood she was gone. The documentation mattered more. Cordelia copied ledgers, shell company records, and correspondence connecting the Caruso Fund to offshore structures. She did not take everything indiscriminately. Patricia taught her to distinguish between information that protected her, information that exposed wrongdoing, and information that would merely create noise. Cordelia created separate encrypted packages for separate recipients. No person would receive more than necessary. Nothing would go to the press. She wanted leverage, not spectacle. On the third afternoon, she walked past a restaurant on Newbury Street and saw Dante with Frank Calabrese through the window, their heads close over the table. Frank's thick hands moved in the particular way they moved when he was telling Dante something he had not yet said aloud. Cordelia kept walking. She went to the Gardner Museum and stood before a Vermeer for 20 minutes. To anyone watching, she was a woman in a grey coat studying a painting. They would not have seen a woman taking inventory. The call from Eleanor came on the 4th day. Cordelia was stepping out of the hotel elevator when an unknown number appeared. "Mrs. Moretti," a composed female voice said, with something raw beneath it. "I think we should talk." Cordelia stopped in the hallway. "Who is this?" "My name is Elena Vasquez." "How did you get this number?" "Dante's assistant has it listed for hotel emergencies." I told her I was the hotel florist with a delivery question. A beat. "I'm not the hotel florist." "I know who you are." The silence changed. "You know?" Eleanor asked. "I know." "Then why are you still there?" It was a strange question. Not defensive or accusatory. Genuinely confused. The way people become confused when a situation refuses to obey the logic they have applied to it. Cordelia entered the suite and stood beside the window. "I'm here because I have things to finish." "What kind of things?" "The kind that require me to remain in Boston a few more days." "What did you want to say, Elena?" "I'm sorry. I know that isn't worth much." Cordelia was not interested in Elena's apology. She was interested in information, and Elena was a source. "Were you with him on the wedding night?" she heard Elena breathe. "Yes." "Where?" "The Elliott. Off Commonwealth, 4 miles away." He had been 4 miles from his bride. "How long?" "Almost 4 years." "Did you know about me before the wedding?" "I knew about the wedding," Elena said, which was not the same answer, and both women understood it. "I knew what he claimed it was. Strategy." Elena made a sound that was half breath and half something else. He said it like that made it unreal. Like because it was practical, it was not a betrayal. "What did you believe?" Elena's voice grew quieter. "I believed I was the one being betrayed by both of you. He used me as the reason the marriage didn't count, and he used you as the reason we couldn't have a real life. Neither of us got to be an actual person in the situation." Cordelia had expected defensiveness, apology, or calculation. She had not expected accuracy. "You're right," she said. "I'm done," Elena continued. "I will tell him in Newport because I need to say it to his face. But whatever happens after that, I am not waiting for him anymore. I needed to tell someone who would understand why it matters. Cordelia almost said something kind. She stopped because kindness at that moment would have required her to step outside the structure she was building, and she could not afford it yet. I understand why it matters. Take care of yourself. After the call, Cordelia sat on the floor for 1 minute and simply breathed. Elena had loved the same man and had been used for a different purpose. All she had received after 4 years was the right to say she was done. Cordelia rose, opened her laptop, and returned to work. On day 5, Frank Calabrese found her in the hotel lobby. He approached, wearing his usual expression, somewhere between observant and unimpressed, as if he had seen too much of everything to hold strong feelings about any particular part of it. "Mrs. Moretti, you got a minute? I'm meeting someone in 10. This won't take 10. He led her toward an unused cluster of chairs, but did not sit. "I'm going to be straight with you. Dante's been distracted since the wedding. You notice anything? He's busy. He's always busy. This is different. People in the organization are asking questions about account movements. About who has access to what." Cordelia held his gaze. "Is that something you're asking me?" "I'm not asking anything. I'm telling you that people are paying attention to things they usually ignore. In situations like that, people in your position sometimes get noticed who were better off unnoticed." "My position?" "New wife. Full access. No history in the organization. It was either a warning or a test, and the difference mattered." "Is there something specific I should know?" Cordelia asked. Frank studied her for 3 seconds. Recalculation moved through his expression, as though he had arrived to deliver a message and was no longer certain the recipient was the person he had assumed. "Just be careful." When Marisol arrived 4 minutes later, she took one look at Cordelia's face. "What happened?" "I'll tell you in the car. We need to move the timeline." Day 6 lasted 11 hours on the phone with Patricia. The Caruso Fund was layered through 4 intermediary entities, 2 in jurisdictions where Patricia's contacts were uncertain. Extracting the documents without disturbing the structure demanded precision. At 2 in the afternoon, Cordelia made a small error. A test transfer passed through a pathway that left a timestamp 3 hours earlier than it should have. Patricia found it 6 minutes later. It's recoverable, but if someone is actively monitoring the accounts, the timestamp is visible. Cordelia remembered Frank's face in the lobby. How visible? Visible enough that anyone who pulls the activity logs in the next 24 hours will see it. They changed the route. It cost them 3 hours and pushed the final work into the morning of day 7. The morning Dante was leaving on what he described as a business trip to Philadelphia. Cordelia knew from the tablet's search history that it was a 4-day stay with Elena at a resort in Newport, booked 7 weeks earlier under an alias. She said nothing. She sat across from him at dinner, poured his wine, and asked about his day. The discipline required to hold everything she knew behind the same neutral expression she had been building for 31 years was the most demanding thing she had ever done. Not because pretending was difficult, because somewhere in those 6 days she understood that the face she showed Dante was not entirely a performance. It was a part of her that had always existed, waiting for a reason to become useful. He left at 9:15 on the 7th morning, suitcase in the car downstairs, phone already against his ear. He kissed her cheek and said he would call. He said Sal would check in if she needed anything. "Have a good trip," she said. He looked at her for half a second, one of those looks that ends before you can name what was in it. Then he was gone. Cordelia listened to the elevator, called Marisol, and began the final sequence. They worked without stopping. Patricia directing the financial steps, Marisol managing the secure files from Providence, and Cordelia moving through documents with the focused stillness of someone who has decided that the time for feeling is later and the time for finishing is now. At 12:47, the last file transferred. At 12:49, the last account moved. At 12:51, Cordelia sat beside the window where she had discovered the truth and looked at the screen without speaking. "It's done," Patricia said. "Yes. How are you?" It was a human question in a day made mostly of logistics, and Cordelia was unprepared. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth, held them there, then lowered her hand. "Ask me tomorrow." She packed the few things she could carry. From the nightstand drawer, she took her wedding ring and held it in her palm. It was beautiful and simple, because she had chosen it herself in a moment when she believed choosing carefully was a form of honesty. She placed it in the center of the drawer, like a period at the end of a sentence. On hotel stationery, she wrote 4 words she had considered for 3 days. I know. Good luck. She placed the note beside the ring and looked one final time at the window, the desk, and the bed that had never been shared. Something moved through her chest that was not only grief. It was the feeling of surviving something by changing shape in the middle of it and not knowing whether the new shape was permanent. She picked up her bag and left. The door closed with the soft, definitive sound of a hotel door that had never once been slammed. Somewhere in Newport, Dante Moretti was ordering room service for 2. His phone was quiet. The alert that would reach him had not yet arrived. The cab to South Station took 11 minutes. Cordelia bought an Amtrak ticket to New York in cash and sat with her bag between her feet. She was 40 minutes ahead of schedule. That should have warned her. When things go exactly right, there is usually a reason, and the reason is often that the disaster is still ahead rather than behind. She texted Marisol 1 word: done. Marisol answered with a row of hearts that meant she understood everything the word contained. Cordelia was looking toward the boarding gate when Patricia called. She answered immediately. I'm at the station. Cordelia, don't get on that train yet. Patricia's voice had lost its composed surface. The Caruso Fund triggered a security protocol I didn't know existed. An automatic alert went to a monitoring service. Whose? The account is registered to Thomas Riley, General Counsel for Meridian Capital Partners. Meridian's board includes Frank Calabresi. Cordelia stood without deciding to stand. When? 90 minutes ago. If Frank has it, Dante may already know. 90 minutes. She had still been inside the suite, placing the ring beside the note. Can they trace the files? No. Those moved through encrypted relays. The trust is protected too. He can contest it, but that would require explaining how the funds entered a joint account in the first place. But he can find me. He will try. Cordelia turned slowly in the concourse. A man near the coffee stand looked at his phone. A woman had remained beside the information board too long without reading it. A security guard moved in a pattern that did not quite feel routine. Perhaps she was being paranoid. Probably. But probably was not enough. Destroy this call log, she told Patricia. Text when it's done. Inside the last stall of the women's restroom, Cordelia pressed both palms to the metal door and forced her body to move at the speed of her mind. Dante would see the alert, go to the hotel, find the ring, and understand the broad shape of what happened. A man like Dante would not respond first with grief. Every resource he possessed would activate. She had planned to be on a train before that happened. She was not on a train. Cordelia dialed a number saved under the name of an art supply store. It's Cordelia Ashford, she said when a man answered. I need the second option. There was a brief silence, then movement. Timeline? Moved up 90 minutes ago. Back Bay Station. The newsstand in the main concourse. A man named Osvaldo works there. Tell him you're looking for the Cordia. He'll handle the rest. Don't take a cab directly there. Destroy the phone before you arrive, not after. The second option had cost $3,000 in cash paid before the wedding to a document specialist Patricia trusted. Cordelia had arranged it before she fully understood whether she would need it. That decision now meant there was no trace in any account Dante could reach. She left South Station by subway, taking an indirect route to Copley and walking the final blocks to Back Bay so anyone following her would have to reveal himself. During the first 11 minutes, she called Marisol. Don't call or text after this. If anyone asks, you haven't heard from me since before the wedding. Marisol's voice became careful in the way it did when she was afraid and refusing to show it. Are you safe? Right now. Will you be safe in an hour? I'm working on it. Call me when you can, even one word. I will. The second call went to Florence. Cordelia spoke in Italian for 45 seconds, confirming dates and arrangements with a woman who said calmly, everything will be ready. The third call was to Patricia. Send the packages to the addresses we discussed. Do not wait for me to confirm. If you don't hear from me by Friday, move everything. Cordelia. Promise. After Patricia promised, Cordelia removed the SIM card, bent it until it cracked, and discarded the pieces at the next station. She left the subway at Copley, walked to Back Bay, and found Osvaldo at the newsstand. He gave her a slim envelope containing the clean identity prepared for her, a ticket under that name, and the location of the car that would take her from New York to the airport. She boarded south without ever using the reservation purchased at South Station. Nobody appeared to follow. Or they were better than she could detect, which was a problem she could not solve. Dante learned at 12:33. He was at the resort bar with sparkling water and lime because he rarely drank before 2 and because it allowed him to appear relaxed without becoming relaxed. He listened to Frank for 45 seconds. "Say that again." Frank repeated it. Dante set down the glass with precise care. "When did the alert arrive?" 10:41. "I needed to verify before." "You called me at 12:33. Silence gathered on Frank's end. "Get to the hotel," Dante said. "Send 2 men ahead. Call me the second you enter the room." He ended the call and sat still for 10 seconds. That was how long it took him to construct the architecture of what had happened from incomplete information. The accounts. The access he had provided. The weak Cordelia had been quiet and helpful and entirely herself. Except, he saw now, for the book she had turned pages in without reading, and the half-second smoothness of her answers about sleep and food. He had missed it. Dante Moretti, who built an empire on reading people and survived 20 years in a world where reading them incorrectly could be terminal, had missed it because he looked at Cordelia and saw what he expected to see. He called Victor Gaines, an investigator who existed outside every official structure Dante controlled. "I need a trace. Every account under Cordelia Ashford. Anything opened in the last 3 months. Transfers, associated numbers, travel." 4 hours, Victor said. 2. I'll add 50%. 3. Done. Frank called from the hotel at 1:18. "She's gone. Bags and personal things are gone. She left the ring." "And?" "A note. 4 words. Frank read them. Dante stood very still. "Preliminary movement is $4.2 million, Frank continued. "The Caruso fund was accessed. We don't know what she took." "She didn't take money from Caruso. She took information." Dante worked it out while speaking. "She's not a thief, Frank. She's smarter than that." "Evidence of what?" "Everything she could reach." Frank was quiet, then said, 3 captains received encrypted messages this afternoon. Account numbers, transaction records, names. Sal's name specifically. Dates matching the problem we handled in March. The March problem was the kind that could end a man in several ways, only one involving the law. Sal had skimmed from shared operations. Dante knew and had been handling it privately. "Carmine is asking whether you covered it," Frank said. Dante pressed the heel of one hand to his sternum, a private gesture a man makes when something strikes a place he did not know was exposed. Cordelia could not have known what those files would land on, or she had understood that in a structure built on loyalty and controlled information, any information moving without permission became a fracture. "Handle Carmine," Dante said. "I'm coming back tonight." Elena was standing in the doorway when he turned, holding a coffee cup with both hands. Her expression told him she had heard enough to understand the shape, if not the details. "You need to go," she said. "Elena, go. It's fine." She said fine with a cleanness worse than anger. Dante considered several explanations and gave none. There was no version of the truth that served a useful purpose, and he did not expend energy on gestures without purpose. He lifted his suitcase and left. In the elevator, 4 words remained in his mind. "I know. Good luck." The note did not say "I hate you." It did not threaten or perform. "I know" meant, "I was more awake in this situation than you understood." "Good luck" meant, "You will need it, you do not have enough of it, and I am already gone." He had looked at Cordelia for 3 years and seen a woman he could manage. What he had married was a woman who had spent 3 years deciding whether he deserved the full weight of her attention. She had decided he did not. Victor called 2 hours and 40 minutes later while Dante's car moved toward Boston at 90 miles an hour. "Personal account under Ashford. Opened 11 weeks ago in Hartford. Small balance, repeated cash withdrawals, no digital trail afterward. 1 prepaid number has been deactivated. 2 landlines remain. One belongs to Patricia Reyes, financial forensics. The other is international. Florence. Dante remembered vaguely that Cordelia had trained in art restoration before they met. Renaissance panels. Florence. Something she had explained over dinner while he had listened only enough to make the correct response. She's going to Europe. Probably already in New York, Victor said. If she's smart. She is. He could pull manifests, call contacts, and search airports. But he was looking for a name he did not know. Dante had money, reach, and 20 years of favors. Cordelia had disappeared into an identity outside the architecture he controlled, headed for the life she had possessed before him, the life he had never bothered to map. Looking through the car window, Dante understood he would not find her that night or the next morning. The longer it took, the farther her documents would move and the wider the fractures would become. He had built his empire on the assumption that loyalty was a wall. Cordelia understood that loyalty remained a wall only until someone located the correct crack. She had spent 7 days finding every one. In the dark back seat, Dante pressed his thumb against the inside of the wedding ring still on his finger. He noticed only then that he had not removed it. He had spent his life being the most dangerous person in every room. For 7 days, he had not truly been in the room at all. She had been the dangerous one, and he had handed her the keys. Dante returned to the Boston penthouse at 11:47 that night and found Frank in the living room with 2 men whose presence he had not authorized. "Get out of my house," Dante said. Frank watched him for 3 seconds, which was a long time for a man who processed quickly and moved faster. "Dante, you had 2 hours and did not call me." "I was verifying. You were deciding." Dante set down his bag, walked to the kitchen, and poured water from the tap. By the time he turned, Frank's 2 companions were already moving toward the door. They understood that the temperature in the room had changed in a way that made remaining actively dangerous. "You were deciding whether her actions created an opening you could use." Frank's face stayed blank. The absence of reaction was its own answer. "The organization needs stability. You're distracted. People are asking about Sal, the accounts, and March. Someone has to make decisions. And you appointed yourself. I'm trying to hold things together. You're trying to hold yourself together with my pieces. Leave. If I learn you've spoken to Carmine or anyone else tonight in a way I would not authorize, our next conversation will happen in a different kind of room." Frank picked up his coat. At the door, he looked back with the closest thing to honesty Dante had seen from him in years. "She's gone. Whatever you plan to do to bring her back, or recover what she took, think carefully about whether that's the war you want. 3 other wars are beginning without her." After the door closed, Dante stood in the kitchen and looked at the space Cordelia had occupied. Her coffee mug remained in the drying rack. A paperback rested spine up on the counter. A scarf hung over a chair. The silence had a person-shaped absence in the center. By 2 in the morning, 4 men sat around his dining table with open laptops, active phones, and a whiteboard divided into 3 columns: accounts, documentation, location. The final column contained 1 entry: Florence. Unconfirmed. Victor searched transatlantic manifests, but he was looking for a name he did not possess. Hundreds of women fit the broad profile: 31, traveling alone, carrying little. Dante ordered him to narrow the destinations to Italy and France, particularly cities connected to restoration programs. At 2:45, Salvatore Domo arrived and sat across from Dante without being invited. "Tell me what Carmine received," Dante said. "You already know. I want to hear you say it." Sal placed both hands on the table. "The Harborside transactions. March dates, withdrawal amounts, and routing through the Berlin account, which you ran without authorization. I had a situation. I did not ask for justification. I have known about Harborside since April. I am asking what Carmine saw so I understand the next conversation." Relief and shame occupied the same space in Sal's expression. "Enough to ask whether you knew, enough to ask whether you covered it." "What did you tell him?" "That I would speak to you. But Benedetto received a package too. His was about Westport." Dante became still. "Westport wasn't yours?" "No, it was yours." Cordelia could not have known about Westport. It had been buried under 4 layers of entities and never discussed in writing anywhere the tablet could access. Who else knew? Dante asked. Sal hesitated. Me. Frank. Riley, the attorney who structured it. Thomas Riley, the attorney whose monitoring service had received the Caruso alert and sent it to Frank 2 hours before Frank called Dante. The blueprint assembled itself. Frank sent Westport to Benedetto, Dante said. Sal looked at his hands. I don't know that. But you believe it. Sal said nothing, which was his version of yes. Frank had not been holding the organization together. He had been dismantling it selectively, placing pieces before the captains in a pattern intended to raise questions about Dante's judgment. In an organization where confidence was the only true currency, those questions could be as damaging as any indictment. Cordelia's files had been the spark, but Frank had carried fuel for months. 2 independent forces had struck the same fault line from opposite directions. Carmine Russo called at 7:15 the next morning. He was 64, had survived 40 years in their world, and possessed a voice like gravel processed through a machine that processed gravel. I got a package, he said. Are the Harborside numbers accurate? Yes. Then you knew. Since April, I was handling it on my timeline. The arrangement is that we do not steal from each other without consequences. The arrangement is not that the boss discovers it and keeps the man at the table for 6 months. Carmine paused. I also received Westport. Those numbers look like a private project funded through organizational resources. That is not what it is. Then explain it. In person, not on this line. Good. Dinner tomorrow. My house. Just us. If you don't come, or you come without answers, I begin conversations with other people. Do you understand? Exactly. The voice on the other end changed, carrying the distant memory of warmth. I've known you 22 years. I watched you build something most men never approach. I don't want to sit across from you as an enemy, but I need to know you're still the man I knew. After Carmine hung up, Dante remained at the counter, staring at Cordelia's coffee mug. The dinner was not dinner, it was an audition. If he failed, Carmine would respond as he always had to men who failed auditions. Dante had always respected his consistency on that point. In Providence, Marisol was working in her studio when 2 men arrived. She knew what they were before opening the door because she had grown up close enough to certain kinds of people to recognize the way they stood on a front step. 2 still, weight on the balls of their feet, the particular blankness that was not emptiness but discipline. Ms. Marisol Reyes? The younger one asked. We'd like to ask about your friend. I don't know where she is. That was true, and Marisol used truth because it had the advantage of consistency. When did you last speak? Before the wedding? You drove to Boston last week. I met a gallery on Newberry Street and came home. The man produced a card bearing only a telephone number. If you hear from Mrs. Moretti, call. Of course. Marisol closed the door and counted to 60 before moving. She did not call Cordelia. There was no way to call her. Instead, she called Patricia. 2 men just left. They know I was in Boston. Did they identify themselves? No. Then they're his people. Are you all right? I'm fine. How close are they? Not close. Cordelia is where she planned to be, under a name they cannot connect. We wait and trust she did everything necessary before leaving. She always was thorough, Marisol said quietly. That was what everyone missed. In Florence, afternoon light entered a high-ceilinged room that had absorbed human noise for centuries. Cordelia stood before a damaged 15th-century oil painting of the Madonna and Child. A crack crossed the lower left quadrant. Moisture had separated paint from the ground near the top edge, but beneath the damage the colors remained extraordinary. Deep blue, ochre, and a red that had survived 500 years without losing the warmth of pigment mixed by hand. The woman beside her was Giulia Marchetti, 61, director of the Restoration Atelier. She had spoken to Cordelia twice before agreeing to the arrangement and met her that morning with the efficiency of a woman who did not require a detailed explanation of why someone needed to begin again. The crack is structural, Giulia said. The panel moved. We stabilized before touching the surface. I know. I did panel stabilization in graduate school. You will have forgotten half of it. Probably. The half I remember is the part that matters. Giulia looked at her, deciding not to ask something. The apartment is above the studio. Rent is what we discussed. You may take meals with us Tuesdays and Fridays. Thank you. You don't need to thank me. Come, I'll show you the archive before the light goes. Cordelia looked once more at the painted face, serene in the particular way of devotional images. The visible loss made what remained feel more present. Damage did that sometimes. It made the surviving beauty matter differently. At 6:04 Boston time, federal agent Paul Donovan finally returned Dante's call. Donovan had been for 11 years the particular kind of federal problem money made manageable. Not on Dante's payroll, not precisely corrupt, but occupying a grey area of selective inattention. His voice no longer belonged to that grey area. I will say this once, then you and I never speak again. Someone delivered documents to the field office this morning, addressed to my supervisor's personal case file for an active investigation. Whoever sent it knew a structure that is not public. Dante gripped the phone. What documents? Transactions, accounts, correspondence? It also summarizes certain arrangements between our offices that I cannot explain to my supervisor. Who sent it? I don't know. It moved through a European relay. Donovan paused. This is the last thing I will ever tell you. Do not call again. Paul, I need. No, Dante. We're done. Figure it out. The line went dead. Cordelia had not waited for him to catch up. The money and files sent to captains were the first wave, designed to occupy him. The federal delivery was the second, hitting from a direction he was not watching. There had been no press leak, no public scandal, nothing uncontrolled. She had chosen specific pressure points and applied exactly enough force. Victor called on the second phone. I found someone matching the profile. The passport is clean, but the connection fits. She landed in Florence. Residential address belongs to a restoration atelier on Via dei Servi, registered to Giulia Marchetti. An address. Dante finally had an address. He could reach her. He had a contact in Milan who could put men outside that door in 3 hours. He could have Cordelia brought back before midnight. Dante stood by the window with 4 lines of Italian on his screen and understood 2 things at once. The first was that he possessed the power to retrieve her. The second was that using it would be catastrophic. Not only because of legal risk, but because of what it would reveal. He would become a man whose response to being outsmarted was force, a man with no option except to send others to seize his wife. More dangerously, it would mean he had decided Cordelia's response required violence. He was no longer certain he had the right to believe that after the sequence of choices that had brought them here. 20 years of instinct told him to move, to close the opening, recover the person, recover the files, destroy uncertainty before it grew teeth. He unlocked the second phone and brought up the Milan contact. His thumb remained above the number. Then he pictured Cordelia in the bridal suite reading the message he had sent from his own reception. He pictured the untouched bed and the wedding ring centered beside 4 handwritten words. He understood that sending men to Florence would complete the thing she already believed about him, that every human being was a resource, every injury an operational problem, every refusal something to be managed until it became obedience. Dante locked the phone. He saved the address and made no call. For the first time in 20 years, he allowed a threat to remain beyond his control because removing it would require him to become exactly the man his enemy believed he was. Except Cordelia was not his enemy. That distinction was the part that hurt. The following evening, Dante sat across from Carmine Russo at a dining table in Newton that smelled of good cooking, old wood, and 30 years of accumulated life. Carmine's wife, Rosa, served pasta, lamb, and red wine, then disappeared with the practiced efficiency of a woman who understood that absence could be a form of hospitality. Carmine poured wine but did not speak immediately. He understood silence as leverage. "You look like hell," he finally said. "I know. When did you sleep?" "I don't remember." Carmine ate a piece of lamb. "Tell me about the girl." "Her name is Cordelia." "I know her name. Tell me about her." Dante did. Not everything. Some things would never belong to Carmine. But enough. The access, the tablet, the 7 days, the accounts, the files delivered to captains and federal investigators, and the packages he still had not mapped. When Dante finished, Carmine leaned back. "You gave her everything." Access to everything, There is a difference. Is there? Carmine turned his glass once on the table. You gave a woman you knew 3 years full access to an empire that took 20 years to construct because you needed a marriage to look authentic. Yes. She used it. Yes. You didn't see it coming. Dante allowed the silence to hold the answer. No. The captains are manageable if you address Sal directly and do not allow someone else to tell the story. Benedetto is 67 and does not want the disruption of new leadership. He will return if you give him stability. Frank is the problem. Frank is handled. Frank is in Charlestown holding conversations you cannot see. He has 18 years of knowledge and a grudge. He must be handled permanently. Dante understood the word. The federal inquiry will cost money, relationships, and part of the organization, Carmine continued. You will be smaller when it ends. That is the realistic picture. And Cordelia? Carmine looked at him. What about her? I have her address. I know. Victor has worked for me too. What will you do? For a man who decided before he moved, Dante had no answer. I don't know. Carmine studied him for a long moment. She did not go to the press. She sent specific documents through specific channels to create maximum internal pressure and minimum public exposure. That is not the behavior of a woman who wants to destroy you. Dante remained still. It is the behavior of a woman who wants you to understand she could have destroyed you and chose not to. The distinction arrived in Dante's chest like physical pressure. Cordelia had known how to generate noise that could never be contained. She declined. Instead, she hurt him in ways that forced a reckoning without burying everyone standing nearby. Go home, Carmine said. Sleep. Return in 3 days with a plan for Frank and a legal assessment of the federal exposure. And the audition? Carmine almost smiled. You sat here for an hour and answered every question without theatre. That was the audition. You passed. Now go home. At the penthouse, Dante picked up Cordelia's paperback from the counter. Its corners were soft from being carried, its spine cracked by more than one reading. The cover reproduced an Italian Madonna in blue and gold. Inside, in Cordelia's handwriting, was her maiden name and a date from 9 years earlier. She had owned it before she knew him. He set it down exactly where it had been and called his attorney, Marcus Webb. The federal inquiry could not be prevented. Its scope could be managed, but management would be expensive and require sacrifices. Dante cooperated with investigators regarding 2 external financial structures that had used his organization with his permission. His agreement narrowed the inquiry but did not erase the consequences. Donovan retired early. Sal repaid what he stole and remained under transparent accounting. Benedetto returned when stability became more attractive than revolt. Frank was presented with a detailed record of his attempt to weaponize Cordelia's disclosure. He was offered a choice: leave immediately with enough money to make departure comfortable but not rewarding, or remain and let the documentation become a different kind of conversation. He left. By Monday, Victor confirmed he was in Fort Lauderdale. The most difficult conversation was not with Frank, it was with Sal. Sitting across from a man he had known 18 years, Dante recognized why he had covered the theft. Sal was useful. Confronting him would have cost something in the short term, and convenience had won. Dante had treated a wrong thing as a manageable thing because management was easier than truth. He had done the same to Cordelia. He had reduced her love to a resource inside a larger structure and assumed he could control the cost. That recognition did not redeem him. It only prevented him from continuing to lie about the nature of what he had done. When the inquiry settled, the empire Dante spent 20 years building was smaller, quieter, and less profitable. It no longer carried the reputation that once made his name something whispered in certain Boston restaurants. The organization survived. Dante survived. He stood in the wreckage of its first version and built a second with full knowledge of what the first had cost. 6 months after the wedding, Dante Moretti flew to Florence. He booked the flight under his own name and carried the address Victor had sent months before, still unused in his phone. He did not decide what he would do when he arrived. The absence of a plan felt like a different kind of honesty than he was accustomed to. Florence in early spring was quieter than he expected. The light fell differently than Boston light. Thinner, older, the kind that had landed on the same stones long enough for the stones to hold opinions about it. He found the atelier on Via dei Servi and stood across the street. Tall windows held the particular light of a place where people handled old things with new attention. He did not enter. He remained there as afternoon shifted, watching the building the way a person watches something while deciding whether he has the right to approach it. At 4:30, Cordelia came out wearing an apron over dark clothes. She removed it as she stepped onto the street, folding it over one arm. Her hair was shorter, or perhaps only worn differently. She looked down at her phone, then lifted her head with the peripheral awareness that the texture of the space had changed. She saw him and stopped. A car moved slowly along the narrow street. When it passed, they were still looking at each other across 8 feet of cobblestone. Dante crossed and stopped 2 feet from her. He had assembled first sentences throughout the flight with the concentration he normally reserved for operational problems. Every version had been inadequate, so he said nothing. "You had my address," Cordelia said. "Yes." "For 6 months?" "Yes." "Are you here to threaten me?" "No." "For the documents?" "No." She adjusted the strap of her bag, the body giving the hands something to do while the mind caught up. "Then what?" He discarded several answers. What remained was the thing he had carried for 6 months without saying clearly to Carmine, Marcus, or himself. "I wanted you to know I understand what I did," he said. "Not what you did in response. What I did. The sequence of it and what it cost you. I needed to say it in person because a letter or telephone call would be the version designed to manage the situation. This is not that." Cordelia was very still. "I'm not asking you to return. I'm not asking you to withdraw anything, stop anything, or give me a version of something I surrendered the right to request. I'm asking you to know that I understand. That's all." The street remained quiet. Cordelia looked at him for a long time. When she spoke, her voice held the evenness he recognized from 7 days of dinners in Boston, the voice of a woman speaking from the considered part of herself rather than the reactive one. "I loved you," she said. "That is what I spent the most time sitting with afterward. Not what you did. The fact that I loved you, it was real, you knew it was real, and you used it anyway. Not maliciously. That would have been easier. You used it casually, like a resource." He received the words without deflecting them. "Yes, that's accurate." Something in her expression changed. Not softened, exactly, but altered in the way acknowledgement alters things. The weight of a truth becomes different after it has been named by the person responsible for it. "How is the organization?" she asked. "Smaller, cleaner in some ways. Still alive." "And you?" he considered. "Older. Also still alive." The corner of her mouth moved, not a smile but somewhere in its neighborhood. "I did not design it to destroy you," Cordelia said. "I want you to know that." Carmine explained it. "It took time before I believed him." "What changed your mind?" "You could have gone public. You understood exactly how much damage to cause, and you stopped. That is not the behavior of a person who wants the building to burn." "I wanted you to live in the building after the fire," she said. "That's different." It was different. Erasure would have allowed Dante to become the victim of someone else's destruction. Instead, she forced him to remain inside the damaged structure, knowing he had created the conditions that made the fire possible. "Yes," he said, "it is." They stood beneath the thin afternoon light while Florence continued around them with the indifference of very old places. "I'm not going back," Cordelia said. There was no defensiveness in it, only clarity. "And I'm not stopping my work here. I have real work, the kind I should have been doing all along." "I know." "Then why are you here, Dante?" "Really?" He looked at her, and the answer was simpler than expected. "Because I spent 20 years constructing something I believed was permanent. I needed to stand before the person who proved it wasn't and say that to her face. Not to change anything, not to recover anything. Some things need to be spoken in person before they become real." Cordelia regarded him for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay." Only that. Not forgiveness, which he had not requested. Not absolution, which he had not expected. Not warmth, which would have been false. The acknowledgement of a person who heard something and decided it was what it claimed to be. "Take care of yourself," she said. You too. She crossed the street and walked away. Dante watched for a moment, then turned in the opposite direction. Neither looked back. That night, Dante ate pasta and drank wine alone in a small restaurant. At the next table, an old couple ate in the comfortable silence of people who had been together so long that silence had become conversation. They did not perform their ease. It was simply present and unremarkable, the way things are when they have been true long enough to need no announcement. Dante watched them without meaning to. Then he lowered his eyes and ate. In the apartment above the atelier, Cordelia made tea and sat beside the window overlooking the street that had become hers. She turned the encounter over as she turned over damaged paintings, studying it from different angles, assessing what remained, what was lost, what could be recovered, and what could not. He had meant what he said. She believed that, which was a strange thing to notice. She still trusted her own reading of him, even after everything. But she had not forgiven him, and forgiveness might not be the correct category for what she had done during those 6 months. Her work had been more like separating a damaged painting from a bad lining. Slow, precise, careful not to lose more of the original than had already been lost. She was intact. That was what she had established in Florence through work and the daily discipline of a life that was entirely her own. She was intact in the places that had been threatened. She had survived and remained fundamentally herself. It was not a small thing. It was the only thing that mattered. On her table rested the painting from the day she arrived. The crack in its wooden panel had been stabilized through weeks of humidification and controlled pressure. The next stage would fill the losses with carefully mixed pigment, matched to the original after hours of considering a single square centimeter from every angle. The painting would never become perfect. The damage was real and permanent. No restoration, however skilled, made a thing as though nothing had happened. What restoration did was make damage legible but stable, visible, present, no longer progressing, so that what had been beautiful before could become beautiful again in a different way, in the way things are beautiful after they have been broken and repaired by someone who understood what they were looking at. Cordelia had always known that academically, the way you know something you studied. Now she knew it another way. She finished her tea and went to bed. Outside, Florence continued its old, indifferent, magnificent life. Lamplight lay over the cobblestones as it had for centuries, and the darkness above the rooftops was full of stars that had nothing at all to do with any of this, and shone anyway.